You guys have been absolutely loving my marker system as I've talked through marker systems for the running back position, the wide receiver positions. You guys convinced me to make a marker system for the tight end position. We've talked about all three of those, and especially in detail for the 2025 class. Well, you guys got me again. You guys have convinced me to yet again make another marker system for the quarterback position. Now, I will preface and say that of the four positions, this is the one that I am kind of least confident in, but that is mostly because I believe at the quarterback position, there is just so much more at play that determines whether a quarterback will succeed in the NFL and translate from a college system to the NFL systems than just analytics. There's like a mental aspect to it. There's a kind of arrogance and swagger aspect to it. There is, of course, coaching fits and, intelligence and all this kind of stuff at the quarterback position that we just can't measure, and especially very different than just production or potential at the running back, wide receivers, and even the tight end position, because they inherently flow down from the success of the quarterback or the offense. That counting their production, I think, makes a lot more sense in terms of their ability to translate from college to the NFL. But when it's the quarterback, when it's the actual field generals themselves, there is so much more at play than just the analytics that you really need to just integrate film a lot more. You need to integrate a lot of personality, a lot of draft capital, a lot of actual fit in terms of landing spot to determine whether or not these guys are going to succeed at the NFL level. Now, with that being said, I do feel like this marker system is about as good as I can possibly get it. It's pretty good. It will, determine some guys that are really, really good. Obviously, they're the phenomenal players. It identifies all of them. It's also doing pretty well identifying some players that might have been drafted highly in the NFL that shouldn't have been drafted that highly in the NFL. It will identify a couple, I don't want to say sleepers, but, like the under the radar guys, the day three guys like Dak and Russell Wilson. It does kind of point them out a little bit. But overall, I'm just basically using this as a way of filtering the first round guys, the big name guys. I don't really care about anybody that got drafted late day 2 or even on day 3 so much, but using this as a filter for top 10, top 15, or even really just first round quarterbacks in general. Did they deserve that draft capital, and will that translate to the NFL? So enough chit chat, enough with all that. Let's actually look at the marker system. Let's dive into this spreadsheet. So once again, you guys, if you've seen the other videos by now, very familiar with this overall layout and this look and the colors and all that kind of stuff. So once again, column N is the big one. So for the quarterback position, this is the most markers that I have at a single position. So at the quarterback position, we have 17 markers. Wide receivers and tight ends, there are 14. Running backs, there are 12. I did actually have 24 markers for the quarterback position at one point, but I kind of drilled it back down a little bit because I've been tweaking with some other stuff. There's some new ways that I've been doing the markers with the quarterbacks that we don't do with wide receivers or tight ends. There are still, of course, PFF markers, just integrated those in today as I've been working on this whole spreadsheet for the past 5 or 6 days, it seems like. But we do have PFF markers. We have adjusted markers based on draft capital. So let's talk through some of what goes into the marker system for the quarterbacks. Again, I am very adamant about needing college production at the NFL level. And I also think that there is a correlation between collegiate experience and also translating to the NFL. I think if you go back throughout the last decade or so, if you identify some of these guys that have been busts at the NFL, most of them I would say were, or I shouldn't say most of them, but most guys in college that were 1-year wonders. So I'm talking Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, guys like that were just, they really only have that one good year of production or even that 1 year of starting. Most of the time, they don't necessarily translate to the NFL level. Now, there are, of course, exceptions for everything. Kyler was kind of a 1-year wonder, but he played behind Baker Mayfield. There's a couple other instances. You can even say Josh Allen was, to a degree, a 1-year wonder. But I think experience at the college level is very important. I think production at the college level is, of course, very important. You got to showcase the ability to be very productive in college, win college games, do all that to translate over to the NFL, but not too much experience, not too much production, because I do think that there is such a thing as being in college too long, Dylan Gabriel, to where, it's why are you just being a starter in college for 6 years? Why don't you just go out? Why are you being a career student? So I think there is something to say. You need to have it. There's a sweet spot there. So with that being said, a lot of these markers, I have markers for career numbers and best season numbers. And the way that I kind of filtered this down was career numbers. I more looked at per game or per attempt efficiency and production. So I'm looking at completion percentage, yards per game, yards per attempt, touchdowns per game, interceptions per game. Now I do have all of the other like raw career numbers highlighted in here, but those are because what I've done for each one of these is I said, okay, you need to have a baseline for career pass attempts per game. That is 30 pass attempts per game is my marker for that. And then you also, to showcase the kind of multi-season experience, need to have a certain number or a certain range of career pass attempts to then also hit that marker. So if you've hit on over 30 pass attempts per game, but you only have 500 pass attempts total in college, that's not a good thing. If you have over, 30 pass attempts per game, but you have, 1,800 pass attempts, that's also not a good thing. That probably means that you've been playing for too long. So there's a sweet spot in there. That's how it works for pass attempts per game, yards per game, touchdowns per game, interceptions per game. You got to have that per game production, but you also need to fit in a range of production that showcases that you played enough in college, but you didn't play too much in college. So that's essentially what's going on there. That's where a vast majority of these career ones are coming from. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 markers for career passing. Then I also have a marker system for rushing yards per game as well, because you need to have that baseline of rushing production. We know how important rushing production is for fantasy in the NFL, that I think you also need to showcase some of that rushing production in college too. Now, again, not to say that every statue in college isn't going to translate to the NFL level. And just as every rushing quarterback in college is also not going to translate to the NFL level, but you need to have some sort of rushing ability in college to basically hit on some of these markers, so to speak. Now, there are also, like I said, markers for best season. And with best season, instead of going to the per game route, I just went for raw production. You just need to have 3,500 passing yards, 30 passing touchdowns, fewer than I think it was five or 6 interceptions. I can't remember what it was. Completion percentage, you have to hit on at least 200 rushing yards or 250 rushing yards. I can't remember. I've been in these numbers for way too long. I can't remember which one's which. But that's essentially like you need to have a best raw season production of that type of a season at the collegiate level to hit on all of those best season markers. And then to just round it out, I do have athleticism markers, or I do have, combine stats, but I don't really have athleticism markers. I don't think that at the NFL level, athleticism for quarterbacks is necessarily the strongest thing. Like, of course, when you're a mobile quarterback, you're going to run a 4.5 or a 4.6 or something like that. You're going to showcase at the combine if you're uber athletic and all that. But I mean, at the end of the day, a quarterback is meant to throw the ball. Yes, you have to showcase some athleticism, and I feel like I captured that by the rushing yards per game and best season rushing total yards. But I don't think that there's all that much of importance in terms of what you can do in a 40, how many bench presses you can do, what's your broad jump and your vertical. Like, none of that I don't think matters for a quarterback who's just throwing with their arm, as opposed to the running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. So I don't have any markers dedicated straight to the combine, but I do require you to be at least 6'4", and I do require you to have at least a 28 BMI. Now, of course, there's always going to be players that come in under 6'4" that succeed at the NFL level. CJ Stroud is 6'3", Caleb Williams is 6'1", but it does seem like the NFL really hones in on those guys that are taller. Drew Brees is always going to be an outlier, but for every one of those guys that succeed at a short height, there's going to be 3 or 5 guys that succeed, at that 6'4" or taller level too. So those are basically my marker system. So that totals out to 17 total markers for quarterbacks. And again, I have an adjustment at the end. The final one is draft capital. Usually for the other positions, it is to hit that marker, you need to be drafted in the first or second round. I'm not doing that for quarterbacks. There's a wide variety of analysis out there, and I found it as well that basically the range for quarterbacks is 1 through 12 overall. Like, that is first round draft capital. For quarterbacks is more like being drafted 1 through 12. I did want to cap it at 10, but there were some quarterbacks that were drafted, 11 and 12 that I wanted to include as well. Patrick Mahomes, to showcase that, being a top 12 pick in the NFL is really like being a first rounder for the quarterback position. And then if you're still drafted in the first round, but after 12 overall, you don't hit that marker, but you do get an adjustment for the marker. I treat that as like second round kind of thing. So that incorporates, your Lamar Jacksons, your Jordan Loves, guys like that. You don't get the marker for it because you weren't a top 12 pick. But I do positively increase your adjustment at the end of it if you are still a first round pick. So you get 3 extra points for the markers if you're a top 12 pick, an extra point if you're a first round pick. And then you start losing points after that. You lose a point if you're in the second round, lose 2 if you're in the third, lose 3 if you're in the fourth, on and on and on. So that's the adjustment. And that's how this is filtered on, is per year by adjusted markers. So you can see, and again, I feel like it does a pretty solid job overall. Last year was Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels. Bo Nix actually edged out Drake May in this as the QB3. I find that pretty interesting given the season that he had. Drake May is, of course, the QB4. McCarthy is 5. Penix is 6. Again, we had a wild season where 6 guys were drafted in the top 12. So all 6 of them are going to look like pretty good prospects in this, especially historically, because we had 6 guys go in the top 12 last year, which is pretty remarkable. 2023, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson. There's your 3 right there. Richardson, funny enough, is actually a really bad prospect that got vaulted by being a 4th overall pick. He's actually he has the same number of adjusted markers as Hendon Hooker, not many more than Jake Haener and Clayton Tune. So, you can see there's a pretty big discrepancy here between Bryce Young and CJ Stroud versus Anthony Richardson. And I think that that just showcases how bad of a prospect Anthony Richardson was. And not to say that he was overdrafted. It does look like he was very overdrafted. But, all the tools were there. And I still don't fault anybody for taking the shot on Anthony Richardson. I took the shot on him myself. I don't think it was bad process. I think you knew coming into it that he was not going to be a good prospect, and it was not on the level of Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. 2022, of course, Kenny Pickett was at the top. He was the only quarterback drafted in the first round, but he wasn't a great prospect. Only hitting on 10 out of 17 markers. That's pretty bad for being at the top of the quarterback class list. Sam Howell actually hit on 3 more than him. Brock Purdy, interestingly enough, had tied Kenny Pickett for the second most markers in the 2022 class. And then, of course, just because he was in the 7th round, the adjustment for draft capital really dragged him down behind, Malik Willis and Matt Corral and Bailey Zappi. But I do find that it is interesting that my marker system had him as the potentially second best graded quarterback in that class behind Sam Howell. And of course, as we know, it has been the most successful quarterback from that class. So I find that interesting. Again, one of these things where the marker system, I feel like, can identify who some of these guys are. It's not going to have a perfect hit rate, but it can find these guys. 2021, of course, Trevor Lawrence at the top. Zach Wilson and Justin Fields were tied as the QB2s and 3s. Trey Lance, QB4, he's in here. Mac Jones, he's in here. 2020, Joe Burrow, of course, Tua, Justin Herberts. Jalen Hurts that comes out actually as the QB4, and the only thing that really kills him, because he actually hit on 12 markers, he was the QB3 in the class overall, but because he fell into the second round, he dropped behind Justin Herbert. So he's actually a better prospect than Justin Herbert, better prospect than Jordan Love. I feel like his career has already bared out that those are basically true facts. He's the only quarterback in this class that has won a Super Bowl, and one of only a handful of quarterbacks in the NFL today that have been to multiple Super Bowls, regardless of what you feel like of the team or how they got there. Jalen Hurts, man, and I was in on Jalen Hurts coming out of that class. I will say I didn't have this marker system at that time. But I do feel validated by his career and by this marker system that Jalen Hurts was probably the most underrated quarterback in that whole entire class. Kyler in 2019, and then the fall off was really hard after that. He had 16 adjusted markers, then Haskins only had 10. Greer had 9. Daniel Jones, even after the adjustment of being a first-round pick, still fell behind Haskins and Will Greer and was not that much better than Drew Lock. So that's interesting. Baker, Sam Darnold, Josh Allen at QB3. Josh Allen wasn't honestly that great of a prospect, but he was better than Josh Rosen. And Lamar Jackson is in there too. Again, also not that great of a prospect. But he was a first round pick. He's in that range. And if you just wanted to see, nobody in here has hit on all 17 markers. But the guys that got the closest, we can see who are the perfect prospects in here. The 5 players that have hit on 15 of these: Caleb, Trevor, Baker, Deshaun Watson, Marcus Mariota. I feel very confident in that list. If you throw in the 14s in here, this is where you get Joe Burrow, Tua, and RG3. If you throw 13 into here, you get Jaden Daniels, Sam Howell, RIP, Kyler Murray, Mitch Trubisky, but then Patrick Mahomes, Andrew Luck, and then Case Keenum snuck in there because he was the most productive quarterback of all time in college, but he was undrafted. So there's that. And then also, interesting enough, Cam Ward enters the chat with 13 markers hit. So he now joins this list. And if you filtered out Sam Howell and Case Keenum as the only 2 quarterbacks that weren't drafted in the top 12, this is the list that Cam Ward now potentially joins as a 13-plus marker quarterback in my marker system for this year, which I feel like is a pretty phenomenal list to be on. Yes, of course, there are misses. You have Mitch Trubisky. Mariota, to a degree, was a miss. He had 4 QB2 seasons, but never had a QB1 season. So I think he's a value hit, but wasn't a production hit. You can argue some of these other guys on whether or not they were hits or not, like RG3 kind of got killed by production. Luck obviously retired early. Tua has been up and down. What has Trevor Lawrence been? But I feel like all these guys at least have been talked about or were talked about significantly higher or significantly highly regarded a lot more than Cam Ward. It feels like some people are just talking about Cam Ward. A lot of people talking about Cam Ward, even with him potentially being the first overall pick. Is he deserving of being that first overall pick? I have been on the train for months now that he is very much deserving of that first overall pick and is a much better quarterback prospect than a lot of people think. And I think that I feel validated very highly by the fact that he is now joining this list of top 12 players, or even, if you just want to filter it down to, we'll filter it down to top 2 overall drafted players. Even if he's not drafted by Tennessee, if he's a top 2 pick. I mean, that's the list, man. That's a good list to be on, even if some of these guys didn't ultimately end up panning out. And you'll see that he, when we get to the PFF markers, still a better prospect than a lot of these other guys too. So speaking of these PFF markers, why don't we get to those? So of course, I have PFF markers for all the positions, and I did again for the quarterbacks. So we have things like big time throws, which is a PFF kind of metric. But you have big time throws, big time throw percentage, true accuracy percentage. So that takes drops into account on top of their completion percentage, turnover worthy plays, sacks percentage. I have those numbers for best and career numbers. I also have a column in here for min and max average depth of target, which I do feel like is pretty important because you want to see these quarterbacks have that ability to kind of push the field vertically. And if you have a lot of these, kind of numbers that are maybe skewed by the fact that they were throwing more short and then the receivers are doing more things, I feel like that kind of comes up with one prospect in particular this year. Generally, you see a lot of these quarterbacks have, their min A dots are even still pretty high at, 8 for Jaden Daniels, 9 for Caleb Williams, 10 for Drake May was his minimum A dot. On these are on at least in seasons of at least 100 pass attempts. But their max A dots, I mean, you can see a lot of these guys, Caleb was almost at a 12, Jaden's at a 10.5, Drake May's at 11, McCarthy and Penix were almost at 11s. You can see even Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, 10, 10.7, Anthony Richardson, 11.5. Like, you got to be able to push the ball vertically as well. So I have baselines and ranges and thresholds for all those too. Comes out to 10 total PFF markers. And you'll see I have colors for these ones as well. So I did the same thing. I wanted to see, well, do these PFF markers kind of matter? Are they predictive in terms of we could highlight some, undervalued guys, some guys that are overvalued? Just, do they nail in directly whether or not a player is actually good? They hit really good markers. They hit on good PFF markers. You should just be in on that guy. So I went through all that stuff, and what I found is, and we can filter these by the color. So what I found is let's go to yellow and red first, because these are guys. Oh, I can't multi-filter. That sucks. Let's start with the red. Red is all of the guys that hit on 5 or fewer PFF markers and were drafted in the first round. That's all we're looking at here. Is I'm just looking at the first round quarterbacks, whether or not they hit on enough PFF markers or not. So these are all the guys that have under 5 PFF markers and were drafted in the first round. You'll notice overall, this is not a very good list to be on. So the only real hit on this list is Josh Allen, which of course, again, you have to remember, if you weren't around in 2018 for this draft cycle of that season, Josh Allen was not a good prospect. He was honestly more of a terrible prospect. He had mad interception issues. He had mad completion percentage issues. He was just this big arm, highly athletic. Like, he was the original Anthony Richardson. And even the first 2 years in the NFL, it wasn't, set in stone that he was going to become one of the best quarterbacks or the best quarterback in the entire NFL until he turned that around in year 3, got Stephon Diggs. The rest has been history, of course, and making history with his record-setting contract this year. But as a prospect, Josh Allen was not that good of a prospect. You have to, if you weren't around back then, might sound crazy, but he really was not. So he is the only player on this list that really has had any sort of modicum of success. I mean, Kenneth Pickett, massive bust. Dwayne Haskins, RIP, bust. Sam Darnold, massive bust up until this past year. Josh Rosen, bust. Mitch Trubisky, bust. Paxton Lynch, bust. Jameis had multiple QB1 seasons with Tampa Bay, but that's just because he didn't give a crap and just kept throwing touchdowns to both teams offensively and defensively. So his numbers were just out of control. But for the most part, not a perennial, franchise quarterback. The only one on this list that has become that is Josh Allen. So interesting take number one. Looking at first-round quarterbacks that hit on 5 or fewer markers, so under half of the PFF markers, not a good thing at the NFL level. Now, one other thing that I noticed is these yellow guys now, they also hit on 5 or fewer PFF markers and were drafted in the first round. But you'll notice this is basically a better list to be on. You'll see Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Drake May, Lamar Jackson is on this list. Again, Marcus Mariota never technically really had a hit in terms of having QB1 performances, but had 4 QB2 performances with Tennessee, and might have even been a QB2 in Atlanta, maybe on a points per game basis. Not sure. Anyway, this is a better list to be on. There are still, of course, still busts. Daniel Jones is on here. Fields, Anthony Richardson. Actually, technically, Fields and Daniel Jones both have quarterback 1 season. So they at least, with the team that they were drafted on, gave you a top 12 season. So technically, they are somewhat of a hit, and Fields at least would get a major value hit as well. But you'll notice this is a drastically better list to be on as a first-round quarterback hitting on 5 or fewer PFF markers, under 50%. What separates this list from that previous list I showed you was all of these guys were rushers at the collegiate level. And you might have noticed that already, that a lot of these guys translated to the NFL and became rushing NFL quarterbacks. And that, I think, is where a lot of the floor success for fantasy football comes from, is their ability to produce with their legs. And then, of course, the ceiling aspect of the Lamar Jackson, of the Jaden Daniels. We'll see this. Maybe there's ceiling aspects that come with Bo Nix and Drake May. There's even really somewhat of a ceiling aspect to Justin Fields that, he can rush for 80 yards and a touchdown and also throw for 250 and 2. So if you package and find these guys that have the passing production in the NFL and have this rushing production, they are much better players to take the shot on than guys like Sam Darnold and Josh Rosen and Mitch Trubisky, guys who don't do well in terms of PFF metrics and on a passing level, and also don't have a rushing floor as well. Josh Allen does have a rushing floor in the NFL. He just didn't really have that in college. He only really had, like I said, 1 true season of collegiate production. So he didn't. I'm just filtering on 1,000 career rushing yards is all I'm looking at. And so this list is drastically better. And I think what's also interesting is if you filter down to 1,500 plus rushing yards, that is a phenomenal list to be on. I think that highlights the true ultra massive, Konami code ceiling of a quarterback when you get Lamar, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix is in there too. And Nix might be in here just because he played for 5 years. But Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson, Lamar rushed for 4,000 yards and 50 touchdowns. Again, if you weren't there for that 2018 draft cycle, there were legitimate questions on whether or not Lamar was even going to play quarterback in the NFL and might be converted to wide receiver or something like that. For 4,000 rushing yards and 50 rushing touchdowns is insane. But that is at least what I'm tracking from PFF is that if you are a first round quarterback and you hit on 5 or fewer PFF markers, I want to know if you have that rushing floor. If you have that rushing floor, I'll probably be in on you. If you don't have that rushing floor, I'm probably avoiding you. You're probably a fade. Now, the only other color on here is the blue color. These are people that hit on over 5 PFF markers, so 6, 7, and 8. Nobody has hit on more than 8 of my 10 PFF markers, but if you hit on 6, 7, or 8 of them, more than 5, we're drafted in the first round. This is a pretty good list to be on. Again, it's Caleb, McCarthy, Penix, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, Tua, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, Kyler, Baker, Watson, Mahomes, Goff. Of course, like there's always going to be misses. I'm not going to be able to find like the perfect sample data set of a 100% hit rate. So you're going to get your Mac Joneses, you're going to get your Zach Wilsons. Bryce Young even may or may not technically be a hit on this list as of yet, but this is a significantly better list to be on than under 5 markers, and especially under 5 markers if you don't have rushing upside. So great list to be on. If you hit on over half of the PFF markers and you're a first-round quarterback, I very much want to know that, and that is a much better list to be on. So with all of that now being said, I kind of hinted towards what was going on with the 2025 class, but let's take a look. So as I mentioned, Cam Ward at the top of the list, hits on 13 markers, which joins that grouping, also hits on 6 PFF markers. So when he is, a top 3, top 5 draft pick at the NFL draft this year, he is going to join that blue list of first-round quarterbacks who hit on over half the PFF markers. Love to see that. Jackson Dart comes out as the QB2. He hits on 11 total markers, also hits on 8 PFF markers. So if he finds his way into the first round, I'm going to be significantly interested in what goes on with Jackson Dart. I personally, I'm a Steelers fan. Personally, I've been rooting for him to be the pick for Pittsburgh, to just ignore Aaron Rodgers, ignore Russell Wilson, be fine with Mason Rudolph as your backup. And if you don't draft Jackson Dart, play Mason Rudolph until we get a top 5 pick next year. Maybe we could draft Drew Aller, or maybe Arch Manning comes out. But I think I want the Steelers to draft Jackson Dart. And I felt that way before I did this marker system. And this marker system now kind of validates that he looks phenomenal in terms of PFF. He hits on a lot of stuff that I'm looking for in my personal markers. If he's a first round pick, I'm going to be very, very interested in him. Now, Dylan Gabriel, Seth Hannigan, Curtis Rourke, Kyle McCord, Will Howard, those are the next guys on this list. Dylan Gabriel hits on a lot of these markers, but the hit rate on quarterbacks that have played 6 years in college is very, very low. Michael Penix was actually the only one last year that I think was even drafted in the top 80 previously. So the draft capital might really kill Dylan Gabriel, but he comes out grading out relatively well. But I think he's 24 years old. He's gonna turn like 25 this year. Played 6 years in college, all started level years too. It's not like it was injuries and the COVID year. Like he played all 6 years in college, and he's kind of small. So I'm kind of out on Dylan Gabriel, but he does hit on a lot of stuff. Then we get to Shedeur Sanders. I think just by just sheerly being a potential first round pick, he is my QB3, but I'm not overall. My QB1 is Cam Ward, and my QB2 is Jackson Dart. So Shedeur Sanders is my QB3, but I really don't love it. So he might be a first round pick, and that might vault him up. That'll probably vault him up after the adjustment, over the Kyle McCords and the Will Howards. Might even vault him up over Dylan. Probably will vault him up over Dylan Gabriel. So he will probably grade out as the QB3 in adjusted markers after the fact if he is a first round pick. But he only hits on 2 PFF markers. And he does not have, now I don't have his numbers from Jackson State, but I don't have, JUCO numbers for any of the other quarterbacks in here. So I feel like it's a pretty fair comparison. But even then, he only has, not best, career rushing yards, negative rushing yards. He would have had to rush for over 1,100 yards at Jackson State, at that lower level competition, to hit on at least having 1,000 rushing yards while being a first-round quarterback with less than 5 overall markers hit. So I I'm pretty vehemently out on Shedeur Sanders. He's going to join that list, that really red list from PFF. That's the list that he's going to join if he is a first-round pick. And I don't like that whatsoever. Honestly, I lean more with a lot of the people that say that Shedeur doesn't actually have, shouldn't actually be drafted in the first round. He should not have a first-round grade. He is much more of a, early day 2 kind of a guy. I am much more in line with that line of thinking than thinking that Shedeur Sanders should be a top 10, top 15 pick. I get that he might get there just because of who he is, of who his dad is, of some teams that really, really need quarterbacks in that top 10 or top 12. So 100% recognize that he might get drafted there, but I don't know if he's deserving of it, and I'm probably going to be out on him in my rookie drafts because I don't like his profile. I don't like his profile at all. And so I'm going to be pretty much out. Jalen Milroe actually comes out right after Shedeur Sanders. He is also, again, if he gets drafted in the first round, which I swear if the Steelers draft Jalen Milroe in the first round, I'm going to be so mad, just like I was when they drafted Kenny Pickett. But another guy that if he's drafted in the first round does hit on fewer than 5 PFF markers, so he will be in that red category, but does have 1,500 career rushing yards. So he would be in that yellow list of first-round quarterbacks under 5 PFF markers hit 1,000 plus career rushing yards. So he would technically join the list of Lamar and Jane Daniels, and he would join Bo Nix. But I feel like he is much more of a Daniel Jones kind of a guy. Like, I don't think there's really much passing efficiency there, especially consider the fact that his best season didn't even eclipse 3,000 passing yards, didn't eclipse 25 passing touchdowns. He threw 6 picks, is his lowest season of interceptions. Like, it's just, it wasn't there at Alabama for Jalen Milroe to give me any sort of confidence in him outside of maybe he could have a floor from rushing, and anything that he does in the passing game at the NFL level, would just kind of be the cherry on top for the rushing. But again, it's Daniel Jones level of production. It's maybe at best it's Justin Fields, but I feel like Fields was such a better passer in college that I was way more in on him than what I am with Jalen Milroe, that I'm also just kind of out on him. So really for me, this quarterback class is Cam Ward at the top. He is I think a top 3 rookie draft pick. I would take Genty, Omari and Hampton. Then I would go Cam Ward at the 1.03 in Superflex, and then I would take Tet McMillan is how I'm looking at this right now for where he slots in. I think Jackson Dart fits in perfectly in the late first round, kind of like this year's version of Bo Nix. I think that he would be a very good late first round pick, especially for any contending teams that maybe just want to beef up their quarterback room, or you don't feel all that confident in some of the other guys that are in that late first. If some of the running backs kind of fall out, or maybe we don't love some of the tight end landing spots, I think Jackson Dart is, if he's a first round pick, is a good late first round Superflex rookie draft pick. Like I said, I'm pretty out on Shedeur, pretty out on Jalen Milroe. Maybe we could pay attention to some of these other guys, but overall this class, as we've all been saying for a while, is not an overly phenomenal class. So I'm not really looking at any of these guys in terms of, that third round guy that might break out, that fourth round guy that I might like. A lot of people really like, I don't know if it's Tyler Show or Tyler Shuck from Louisville, doesn't grade out all that well, does not grade out well in PFF. He's this year's Kenny Pickett to me. So another 6-year guy, 25 years old. I do not care. Quinn Ewers, even worse than that. So don't care about any of these guys. Give me Cam Ward, give me Jackson Dart. That's basically it in terms of this 2025 draft class. So appreciate you guys for sticking with me for this video. Again, if you missed on my videos for the running back and wide receiver positions, you can find that right up here. I'll link that at the end of the video. Tight ends, I'll link that over here as well too. And then if you want to check out what these markers actually look like, you want to dive into the data, I have the Google Sheet link available for people who are in the DLF YouTube Discord channel. So the link for that will also be down in the description if you want to check out all of this stuff. And of course, I'll have updates for all of this on the YouTube channel post NFL draft. So we'll get a finalized kind of look at these marker systems after known draft capital and landing spots. And with that all being said, guys, thank you guys for checking this out and sticking with me for this long. We'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.